Hi, everyone. Welcome to MGAC Inner Voices, a podcast digging into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. As always, I want to preface this podcast by letting you know that we're not experts in all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to share our stories and discuss how together we can create a better outcome for all of us in the AEC industry and beyond. As you all may know, I'm Bryan Gamez, your host, an Assistant Project Manager at MGAC, working and living in Los Angeles. And today we have the special privilege of talking to a fellow LA office member, Jayson. What's up, Jayson? How are you?
Hey, Bryan. I'm doing great. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jason Lacno-Musngi. I'm a cost consultant in the LA office. I've actually been with the firm for about almost 5 years in June. So it's funny because this is actually my first job right out of college. So in terms of professional experience, this is pretty much, I've been from the very get-go at MGAC.
Wow, you're a veteran of the LA office. It's so interesting to our listeners. Jayson and I met just about 2 months before the pandemic, and we left the office and we haven't seen each other since then. So I would like you to tell, our audience more about your identity.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that, just looking at me, I would look Asian, but I am Filipino. My parents were actually both born in the Philippines. I'm the first generation, the first to come over here from my family.
I'm also first generation as well, so I can relate to yourself and where you're at. I've also been in the industry for about almost 6 years now. I'm interested to know more about how your identity has really affected you in the professional space, and also if you've ever really faced any challenges in your career because of your identity.
Being an Asian or Filipino in the construction industry is quite interesting in a sense because, I would say for the most part, the construction industry is, white dominated, and being an Asian coming into this industry is little, eye changing, or, I don't really have any family members or any like friends to say that I could relate to that actually work in this industry. So for me to be coming into this is kind of like, it's being blind. I'm the first one to experience all these interactions with, other professionals. So I'd say for the most part, like I've had a great experience, meeting a lot of these professionals. I haven't had any really big issues. If anything, it's a little bit more about little small mannerisms that I've noticed that are different from, my upbringing or where I came from.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Or elaborate what you mean by mannerisms?
So let's see, I guess some mannerisms that I've grown up, like taking from my family is like a lot of it's, like very strong eye contact, like strong and firm handshakes. So this is something I've noticed, like, as a kid, I have noticed like I shouldn't be having these like strong gazing, eye contact with my parents. Cause in a sense, I would think just from my personal experience, it kind of feels like a disrespect to like, stare them straight into the eyes. And then we didn't really, give like handshakes, when we greeted one another, it's more of like a kiss on the cheek and stuff like that. So it's kind of different, like, especially being a professional, it's like, it's like a handshake. I didn't really handshake, my relatives or like friends or anything like that. It's a little bit different from a professional standpoint, but I guess like, the mannerisms is like, it's very subtle, if anything. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain because, like we when I try to think about these small mannerisms that like are different from, how I grew up to say like, the construction industry or my professional career, it's, for me, it's normal. Like I've grown up doing the same thing over and over. Like, when we greet, my friends in like high school, it's like, we say like, what's up, all this stuff, you start getting into, the professional industry. It's kind of like you're taught like, okay, you need to be professional. This is how they speak. This is how we should speak. When you introduce yourself, you're like, oh, hi, I'm Jayson, eye contact, firm handshake, everything like that. But, it's kind of like a term because I never saw my family do that. Whenever, my family would tell me to, or for example, like, my parents, are from the Philippines and they kind of have, hard time speaking English, especially my dad. And so a lot of times, when he asked me to say, for example, like, call something for the bills or something like that, it's like he's telling me to call them. And the interaction is very interesting because I have to pretend I'm him. And then, I'm just like this 12-year-old talking on the phone. It's like, oh yeah, what's your social security? Or are you Mr. I have to talk as my dad. I'm like, yeah, my social is this. I'm like a little kid. And like, he gets mad at me because I'm not asking the right questions. And then I have to like kind of translate it back and forth. And it's like, it's interesting because like I'm just thinking like this isn't normal for everyone, but like as for like immigrants, I would say this is like an everyday thing that happens all the time.
You're bringing up my childhood too, because my mom speaks English, but she has a strong, heavy accent. So she would do the same thing to me. She'd be like, "We're going to talk to the bill people," but I noticed they treated me a lot differently than they would have treated my mom because of the accent, and that to me was just baffling. And I'm assuming your parents weren't in like a professional white workforce, right? My mom wasn't as well. So it's interesting that you say we entered the workforce. We're learning to be professional in an industry that is dominated by white men. And when you're entering that workforce, you're picking up their mannerisms, you're picking up and you're learning. And like how you're saying, it was a learning curve for you, and it's been a learning curve for me. And now that we're here 5 years and 6 years into our careers, it's just interesting to look back and think, wow, you assimilated into this professional setting, but you still look back and think to your roots.
This is very interesting because I'm thinking about like, my upbringing. If I was born off in San Diego, I moved to Carson like when I was about 2 years old. And then I come to realize the reason why my parents moved to these cities is because it's a big Asian, or more specifically Filipino dominated city. I'm looking at a census right now. I just like Googled Carson real quick. In 2010, 25% of it was Asian, but out of that 25%, 20% or plus is Filipino, which is, it's an interesting fact because, my parents, especially for them to come as immigrants, they want to be somewhere where they're comfortable. And, being somewhere comfortable is seeing people that look like you. Like, I mean, I can understand now looking back at it, it's like why they moved to these cities. Cause it's scary, moving to a new country, everything is different, all the mannerisms. And the thing is, especially since they were adults coming into it, it's harder for them to pick up these mannerisms and adjust to it as, for us when we're, if we're born here, like we start to pick it up in grade school right away. So it's like, okay, we learn that this is, the way how people talk to each other and whatnot.
What you're saying resonates completely with me. So I want to know, have you ever faced discrimination in the workplace, or like have there ever been instances where you have felt people in positions of power within the organization have like discriminated against you? Have you seen discrimination to people who identify similar to you?
So for the most part, I think I'm lucky that, we're in the LA office and our office is very diverse. It's very, very mixed for the most part. And especially our office, I feel like completely comfortable. But there has been some times where I noticed that going into meetings, it's predominantly white men, and it's like, it's a different atmosphere. As soon as you walk in, you get this like little hesitation of, like, I don't look like them. I have to interact in a certain way to, get my point across.
I felt that you're adapting to a persona where you hope that they recognize you, that they see you, and that they're listening to you. Because when you are a minority, you always have in the back of your head that my opinion may not matter as much as these folks.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And that's unfair to us. It's unfair to you. I mean, this is one of the things I love about this podcast is exploring these themes of communication, nonverbal communication, really, because you're talking about how you're entering a room and all of a sudden you think, wow, these people, we're so affected by how people see or view us because of how we identify through these minority groups. Mm-hmm. And it's to a point where it's like, how do we, assert ourselves in our opinions and make ourselves known that we are here to, be just as successful as they are.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was trying to get at. It's interesting because in your head, like, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm going to say, but
Right.
when you see a majority of the room, it doesn't really look like you and doesn't talk like you specifically. You start to get this sense like, I'm the minority. Most of them are probably correct. They're a lot older.
Yeah.
So if you see the majority of the room look like that, you start to feel like, I don't know if I want to speak up and talk about what I believe is right, especially in a job setting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think I've definitely had the same thought. If we have greater diversity at the very top, at the C-suite level, we know that our goals are achievable, right? We want to be, I know that I at least want to be a great leader. And I also want other people to know, be like other generations that follow. I have a little sister and she's going to college. So it's interesting. I want in 10 years' time, it's like, what will our society look like in the professional workplace? And I hope that in 10 years' time, that this is not a conversation that, makes people uncomfortable. So I see right now we're striving to make this a more equitable space for all. That brings us to our own diversity. So why do you think diversity, equity, inclusion is important in the workplace?
I think it's very important because it educates you on people's, their backgrounds. It educates you on their, religion. And so, it teaches people respect for people's beliefs, which is huge.
I agree. And I think our country right now is in such an interesting state. Turning on the news, going onto Twitter, and seeing these viral videos of how minorities are treated recently with the attack on elderly Asians and across the country because of COVID. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement and how this happens not just outside, but it also happens in the workplace professionally. And it's better to have these conversations now and create the dialogue and understand that, hey, we are here to create mutual respect with each other, learn from each other. And I think that's what you're bringing to the table here today, Jayson.
I hope I am.
I think you are. So how does your unique identity make you a strong asset to the team? And how has it informed you professionally?
Okay, I would say, a unique identity. I think the first thing you think it's, visually. So for me, obviously it's my long hair. I think, which is interesting because I started growing out my hair in college, like the typical college phase, and people end up cutting it after. And I ended up keeping it because I just started to realize, like, for my identity, I like the long hair because, it somewhat associates with taking days, one step at a time, relax, don't stress out too much. But at the same time, I'm trying to bring this, I guess, personality of mine of being, very nice, carefree, but obviously, be on top of your work. It's just like, I want the workplace to be more enjoyable. If I'm going to spend, the rest of my life, per se, not to make it sound bad like that, to be working, I want to make sure it's enjoyable. I want people around me to be happy, so I try to bring that positivity into our office just to make sure everyone feels good, especially if any new hires, for example. I want to make sure they're feeling welcomed. They just joined and pandemic hit, and like they didn't even get to meet anyone. So it's a little scary for people, to just join an office. We want to like one another, especially when you're working. That's
true. And I think, Jayson, you and Gary's our other coworker, and you guys made me feel really welcome. But
it's funny though, because actually Gary was my college classmate.
That's true.
So for those that are listening, like, Gary is another cost consultant as well, but we were classmates in college. I mean, we got along so well, and I'm glad that he actually got the job as well.
Yeah, he's really cool. And I think when I entered the office, I just thought, wow, this LA office is actually really diverse. And that tells me that there's so many different backgrounds here that I'm going to be able to learn a lot from other people here. And for me, it was, being welcoming, being chill, it's just having a laugh, it was really cool. So anyways, I digress. So what advice would you give young people pursuing AAC careers who could be worried about facing discrimination or feeling like they're not adequate, or have like the same thought that, I don't really see anyone that looks like me? What would you say to them?
I would say just to follow your passion. I myself didn't have anyone to base my career on. I didn't look to my family or my friends. I didn't know anyone that was really following the path of the AEC industry. And so I thought to myself, you have to be that, brave representative for those following behind you. So for example, in my high school, I could only remember, I think one time there was an outreach, an engineer came by. And so I was very fascinated because, I was very into the math STEM field, but I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my career, and no one really told me what to do. And so after seeing this outreach of people that start to look like me, that are joining this industry, it made me start to broaden my path or, field vision of, maybe I can do this. And so at the same time, you want to make sure that, the industry doesn't look like you, but doesn't mean you can't join it. And so by you joining it, you're setting an example for those behind you. Like, okay, the people look like me. And so you feel more comfortable. Like it takes a lot of bravery to join these industries. But at the same time, change won't just happen, overnight. So you have to be the change you see.
Yeah, and if they join MGAC, they'll see us.
Yeah, just make sure to know that, I'm the one that brought you here. I'm just kidding.
So I kind of touched upon this earlier. In 10 years' time, what do you think that our industry will look like?
I mean, in 10 years' time, I would like to see it be more diverse, but, a lot of times it's a slow change. If anything, I would like people in the industry to understand that you don't have to look a certain way, act or dress a certain way to get your point across. As long as you're professional, as long as you get your work done, that's pretty much all that matters. It shouldn't be based on your appearance.
Yeah, because that's a very superficial thing for someone to even get hung up on.
Yeah, exactly.
There's more to us than just this skin color or what we look like.
Exactly.
I hope that in 10 years' time, we are appreciated for what we're bringing to the table, and that diversity becomes a normalized aspect in all companies. I know a lot of companies are trying to do that now with like advertising and marketing, but in reality, I'm not sure if minorities are creating those marketing campaigns, but I hope that they are.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that.
So speaking about our company, how would you bake DEI into MGAC's DNA?
I would say for the most part, the company as a whole, I think, is doing a wonderful job at that. We have, I would say, one of the most diverse companies I've seen in terms of the construction industry. And so that's a big start. And also, our company is doing a lot of these DEI podcasts, and we have calendars, reminders talking about all these different ethnicities. And so I think for it to be baked into our DNA, it will take time. Obviously, talking to one another about it is the biggest thing. So I think that the path that we're going on right now with MGAC is great, and I hope to see in 10 years' time, becomes even more diverse.
Yeah, I agree. I think it also has to do with their intention for hiring more diverse, unique people, which I believe that they are doing. And if you were establishing a company from the ground up, what would you do to ensure that DEI was central to the company's values?
So for me, I would say, okay, if I were to establish a company from the ground up, I would think from the get-go, I would treat everyone equally, especially equal pay, I would think is a big thing, because there's a big gender pay gap, and especially in the male-dominated construction industry. For me, if I were to, start my company from the ground up, I'd make sure that everyone is paid the same, especially if they have the same education qualifications. I think that's all that really matters.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just basing this back, looking to my parents. My mom, she has a master's. My dad is not educated, but he has a job that actually pays a lot more than my mom, and she has her master's. I mean, it could be an industry thing, but I would want to make sure that everyone gets paid equally for the time of work and effort that they put.
I agree with you. I mean, it's going to take years for that divide to get closed up, but that would be an essential item for me. I just want equity to be at the forefront of any company. If I ever created one, if you ever created one for our generation, I want equity to be a foundational value.
I agree. If you were to start a company, I want to be the one that's actually at the forefront of that. As an employee, if you know that your employer treats you well and takes care of you, that's how you retain your employees. If they know that they're being taken care of, or know that we'll keep lowballing their pay until they actually, ask for it. For the most part, it's like when you respect your employees and you're paying them well, they won't want to leave. For example, like Costco, right? Like they're probably the top paid, job for people that's like right in this high school. You're just coming into the industry and they pay really, really well. You treat your employees well and they'll take care of the company. The employees will start talking about like, I love this job. They treat me so well. And, it shows a positive impact onto the company. I guess talking back to MGAC, they've treated me so well just coming straight out of college. And so I'm just happy to be, a part of this company.
Can you speak to increasing diversity and representation while avoiding tokenization?
It's a tricky question because obviously the first couple, people are like, I'd say like if you're to hire a couple people, right? And like, you want to increase your diversity, they are obviously going to be seen as the token XYZ, right? To avoid tokenization, it's not just about employing an XYZ. It's more of the intention of the employer. They want to make sure that they are seen and heard as an actual human being, not just like, okay, we have a number to pump our diversity up. I think it all comes from top down, I guess. As long as the boss is saying we value them as an employee, they're a great asset to our company, I think that is fine. It's a slow process to bring more representation into the company. It's small baby steps to get there. So I just think as long as the intent from the top down is to, show that they are valued and they're cared for, then I think that's all that matters.
For some of our coworkers who may have never experienced discrimination, this could be, our GCs or people we work with on a day-to-day basis. What advice would you give them to be an ally?
My advice would just be to be respectful for our coworkers, because it's hard enough for them to be joining an industry that doesn't represent them. And just to know that they are valued as an employee and that as long as they're doing their work, then that's all that matters.
I would just think that people see something that's wrong or that's not really okay. You bring it up, you encourage a dialogue between others, encourage them to see that other person's point of view, to understand that some things bring pain to others. It brings back memories. And if someone is suffering and is going through these emotions, that's not a good place to be in a professional workplace. There are a lot of our coworkers who have never faced discrimination. There are a lot of white men who have had such a privilege in their life. What's interesting is that my boyfriend, he's white, and he really tries to understand where I'm coming from as a Latino who's gay. And he's obviously gay, but there's just discrimination that he's never faced before. When we have our conversations, he does his best to understand, I actually have been very, very privileged. And I'm going to do my best to ensure that I'm not saying things that are going to make people uncomfortable. And if you do see something and it's wrong, you speak up and you let them know, hey, you cannot say stuff like that. I know that older generations may say phrases here and there, but it's important to communicate to others that in order to be an ally, you need to understand where that person who is a minority, where they're coming from, what their background is, and then be cognizant of the fact that your words matter. Communication matters between people. So I would say that if you want to be an ally, you have to extend your hand to the other person and really try to have that communication and common ground with them.
I totally agree.
Jayson, it's been really great speaking with you. I hope that people, when they're listening to this, they understand that, you and I come from diverse background. We come from melting pot cities, and it's helped us in our perspectives, in our careers. And I hope that, moving forward, that we normalize diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So, I appreciate you coming on and speaking your thoughts and letting our listeners know more about yourself.
Thank you, Bryan. It was a pleasure being on this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of MGAC Inner Voices. Come back next month and we'll have another episode for you. Thanks, everyone.